Welcome back to our read on contemporary society and the primary institutions of the arts, music, and communications. This is video 6F, part 11, where we will continue our focus on the communication platforms embedded in the mega media corporations. In this video narrative, we will specifically focus on television, cable, and the internet, with review of how they've been influenced by the negative we have so often spoken about, moral relativity, which today seems ever present in the communication content. And just to refresh you on definition, moral relativity is the negative life-draining belief system of the aggressive and progressive left, wherein faith is not put in God, but instead is invested in the isolated mind of man. Moral relativity, we clearly assert, is a twisted moral philosophy, where God is pushed out only to be supplanted with man's ego as determinant of one's moral right or wrong. Conditional, of course, to one's individual opinion, circumstance, ideology, and inherent biases, and often driven by the overriding arrogance of a single and selfish mind. Moral relativity, as we have repeatedly pointed out in prior video narratives, is a significant threat to our contemporary society, and all people, regardless of stature or location, regardless of education or race. Moral relativity comes at us in many ways, from many places across our American culture. Principally, it bleeds through those primary institutions influencing our lives. It works subtly, undermining those very institutions which we trust to shape and protect the values we should embrace, while rejecting those values we should not. The destructive and inherent nature of moral relativity is to eat away at the integrity and moral quality of our organizations, our institutions, and specifically the people who lead them, eroding and suffocating their good values and overtaking them with dark, malicious ones. In today's mega media, the advancement of technology has propelled communications to a wider and deeper reach than ever before. Electronic reach to the American audience is nearly total, touching about 100% of the public by antenna, cable, or satellite. Through the television, cable, and digital networks, the big media companies field a powerful communications empire, extending their reach to over 115 million American households in any part of the country at any time of the day. In today's mega media, not only has reach expanded, but so has the content we are getting in our TV and cable programs, reaching and impacting the young and old, exposing our young children, our teens, and ourselves to subject matter which oftentimes is unwelcome in our homes, unhealthy to our minds, and hurtful to our hearts. In TV and cable, there are virtually hundreds of content choices provided by the big media companies, which seek to cater to virtually every interest, appeal, or desire they perceive people might have, or they want you to have. It's not by happenstance they create these programs they choose to produce. It's by choice and their intent. And the networks and production companies scramble every season to bring us an ever-widening spectrum of such content often reflecting their values and character. Yet, we are right to ask each season, is this the right kind of content for my family, my children, and myself? Of course, the answer to the question is situational. The spinmeisters will readily cite you the need to consider the type of programming, the time of day, the channel tuned in. Yes, of course, those are all factors to consider. Certainly there is good program content out there, a lot of it in fact, educational, inspirational, and fascinating. But there's also a lot of garbage too, flowing from the studios, Hollywood, and the parent media companies right into your home. As these giant companies have deliberately increased their bias over the past 20 years or so, for programming with content decidedly reflecting an ugly disposition for the vulgar, the violent, the hateful, emphasizing selfish, repugnant, and destructive qualities of humankind instead of uplifting and enriching ones. There's no secret to the wide extent moral relativity has descended upon the culture of the big media companies, and subsequently their networks in television and cable. Spreading throughout their organizations, in their boardrooms, amongst the institutional leaders, in their studios and production houses, where in large measure God has been pushed out, and in turn a dark morality has seemingly been embraced. To that point, Maureen Callahan of the New York Post, in an April 2016 article, writes about this contagion of moral relativism spreading across the TV landscape, and she clearly states how TV shows are going way too far to attract viewers. She writes about how, in TV and cable today, moral transgression automatically signifies high art, and goes on to say infanticide, incest, pedophilia, matricide, torture, rape, castration, cannibalism, and mass murder are all now commonly employed tropes meant to signify quality. She goes on to cite several examples of what she has seen and heard in TV and cable over the past few years. Beginning with ABC's Scandal, citing Olivia Pope, the protagonist, long established in the show's vernacular as a white hat or good guy, beating a wheelchair-bound stroke victim to death by pulping his face with an aluminum chair. Gruesome scenes of torture and dismemberment, politically expedient murders and illegitimate war, rape, kidnapping, and blackmail. And one endless scene where an imprisoned terrorist chewed through her wrist to escape. This one was morally and artistically bankrupt. Callahan goes on to point out HBO's Girls, where Lena Dunham's Hannah, teaching at a junior high school, responds to her principal's warning about unprofessional behavior by exposing her vagina to him in the audience. Outlandishly, it saves her job. On Mr. Robot, a highly acclaimed USA program, one character strangles another to death during a rooftop tryst for no discernible reason. His pregnant wife then stabs herself in the uterus with a fondue fork to induce labor when the cops arrive. In the sophisticated spy thriller The Americans, a plotline is featured about a grown man seducing a 15-year-old girl, just a young teen. In January 2016, ABC makes a huge change in its marketing and programming strategy. They make an historic decision to change their longtime and successful marketing theme from the Family Channel to Freeform. At the time of ABC's announcement, many asked a simple but obvious question: why? Why the change after many years with the successful family tagline? ABC Family to Freeform, in a time where moral relativism has soaked into Hollywood and its parent media empires and down into the boardrooms of major studios, like ABC. The answer to the question why is clear. With ABC Family morphing into ABC Freeform, it was obvious to industry pundits and critics alike the real motivation of ABC leadership to changing their name was to allow them to break away from the perceived standard structures by a family-valued marketing byline. And by doing so, they opened up their programming intentions through a new title, which would impose no restrictions to their future programming intent, especially when they could choose to cross lines of decency and social responsibility. Critics of ABC's change have weighed in, saying, first, ABC Family executives are only after attracting viewers, without concern about showing young people in questionable scenarios in its series and films. And second, criticizing ABC management for their main focus on ABC's liberal bent towards teenage pregnancy, underage drinking, and LGBT-related issues. Third, many parents have reacted negatively to ABC's family programming, feeling that the network has gone from family-friendly to too risque, especially for younger and more impressionable viewers. And last, they argue that ABC's content in shows such as Greek, The Secret Life of the American Teenager, The Fosters, and Becoming Us is far too racy for family viewing. It's not just ABC by any means. Content has deteriorated across the networks and cable channels, appealing to sick violence, senseless killing, gross dehumanization, and gore, appealing to the lowest instincts and doing so week on week. Take your pick. The programming has degenerated into sex, bigotry, vice, wanton killing, stealing, gangs, war, perversion, scandal, adultery, alcohol, and drugs. It's apparently a reckless race to the raunchy bottom. "30 or 40 years ago, when the television studios held to respectable standards for content and quality, none of these programs would have even been considered for airing. And if a producer or director presented them for consideration, they would have been promptly fired." You just can't make this stuff up. Listen to these titles for a moment. They're revealing to the nature of the people behind them. Dollhouse, Revenge, Betrayal, Deception, Greed, Desperate Housewives, Devious Minds, Deadly Sins, Bad Teacher. The artists behind these works have an obvious agenda, and frankly, it's not a good one. And to add more madness to the mix, we get another example of the insidious nature of moral relativity from both TLC and Discovery Channel, fronting programs which clearly aim to diminish the Amish with the ugly portrayals of their culture. It reminds one of the old human tendency to taint whatever might be good. Fox is no exception. In January of 2017, Chris Menahan of Information Liberation reported out on a new sickening comedy show on Fox, featuring a 6-year-old boy wearing a bondage gag. The Fox show is named The Mick, created by David Chernin and John Chernin, both sons of the top Hollywood executive Peter Chernin. Also directly related to content is the language now used in TV and cable shows over the past few years. The language has seriously deteriorated, degrading to various vulgar profanities. Especially with the explicit use of F-bombs, clearly something people never heard coming out of their TV since the beginning of the industry decades ago. In an article in the liberal Washington Post in March of 2016, Bethany Butler posed a question: "Is there anything you can't say on TV anymore?" She followed it with a qualifier: "It's complicated." A timely question reflecting on the marked decline in language coming out of the TV these days. Bethany, in the Post article, starts with an example of 3 episodes into FX's critically acclaimed miniseries, America Crime Story: The People vs. O.J. Simpson, where Sarah Paulson, as beleaguered prosecutor Marcia Clark, lets the mother of all F-bombs fly, and then followed by more F-bombs in subsequent shows. The F-bomb was a word that used to be forbidden on basic cable, but these days, what exactly can you not say on television? Both cable and broadcast networks seem to be pushing the envelope, but it's not that the rules, which have always been fairly vague, have explicitly gotten looser. It's the standards reflect the times. In 2016, our collective vocabulary is edgier than ever. And oh, by the way, it's not complicated, as the Washington Post would have you believe, an obvious relative attempt to blur up the issue and confuse the reader. It's deliberate, and in profoundly poor taste. It's no more complicated than that. Another ugly development in TV and cable language, which we hear all too frequently now across many, many programs, is the intentional use of holy names, especially God's name, in vain, in profanity, and in curses. And similarly, the disrespectful use of the name Jesus Christ, most time in reoccurring vulgar references. Forbidding the negative use of these names in television shows or programs airing on cable channels is no longer done. Now you can often hear disrespectful use of both God's and Christ's name written into scripts and used casually in curses. Just a few years ago, out of respect for millions of Christians, Jews, and Muslims in America who hold these holy names sacred, you would never hear the name of these religious figures used in crass cursing on TV. Well, regretfully, it's not that way anymore. The scriptwriters, promoters, and producers in Hollywood, using the name of God and Christ in curses is just fine with them, even encouraged. Why, in their collapsing moral culture, course is in, and respect is sin. Also, in April of 2016, we have the Parents Television Council weighing on content, commenting on their findings from a recent study on TV programming regarding established rankings in accordance with parental guidelines. The study's findings revealed a rather alarming statistic about current television content. In the study, they tracked the number of primetime TVG-rated programs over the course of a 2-week period in 1997, and they did the same 17 years later in 2014 for the same calendar 2 weeks. What do you think they found 17 years later when they examined TV programming in 2014? The number of primetime TVG-rated programs went from 27 hours in a 2-week period in 1997 and decreased to 0 hours in a 2-week period in 2014. 27 to 0 in 17 years, clearly reflecting a significant change in television programming content and a dramatic decline in tasteful, innocent shows for children and youth in just 17 years. This is what moral relativity looks like. In 2015 and 2016, there were no regularly scheduled primetime TV series rated TVG. That's right, 0 shows scheduled over the 2 years, much to the dissatisfaction of parents and youngsters across the country. Equally concerning, the Parents Television Council also found during the same time period there was a huge plunge in the primetime broadcast of shows rated TV PG, an overwhelming indication of how good content and television programming has markedly degraded, and replaced with shows full of violence, sex, anti-values, and the like. Again, this is what moral relativity looks like. Pretty sobering findings, and these facts beg an obvious question. Why such a drop over the 19 years in TVG and PG rated programming? We've learned in science, whenever you have an effect, there's always a precipitating cause. So, what might be the cause, as we've been discussing the effect thus far? We represent the simple and straightforward answer. The cause is to be found in the culture and leadership of TV and cable companies, and we say it is clearly their shifting away from the absolute morality of God and an inward shift to moral relativism. During the 19-year period in question, especially in the big media companies, Hollywood production studios, and in the ego-laden networks, an erosion in the fabric of society has occurred, mainly in a sharp decline in absolute morality, while concurrently we've experienced a consistent climb in relative morality. Not a very good picture, is it? The growth of moral relativity at the expense of absolute morality is in fact our cause and effect in the deterioration of programming standards in both TV and cable. Always remember, oftentimes what we see is what they see, and their minds are little sponges. It's up to us as adults, parents, friends, to set the right example, and recognize it's our responsibility to set appropriate boundaries as well, not just for what our children can see, but also what we tolerate viewing ourselves. This completes our video narrative on TV and cable. Please go on to Video 6F Part 12, where we will cover Internet communications, rounding out our contemporary review of the arts, music, and communications.